Okay, good afternoon, GraphQL Conf. My name is Tim.
I'm Thomas.
And we are super excited to be here today. I want to ask a question. What do you think is one of the main reasons why GraphQL is so successful? We believe it's the tooling, and in particular, GraphiQL. If you get started with GraphQL today, you will probably have your first interactions with GraphiQL. You can use it to try out how actually a query is mapping to a response, and with that build your mental model, how GraphQL actually works. At Stellate, we are a GraphQL company. We're building tooling around GraphQL, and without the technology, our company wouldn't even exist. GraphQL enables us to do very specific solutions that wouldn't be possible before. And so we believe that not only we wouldn't exist without GraphQL, GraphQL probably wouldn't exist without this great tooling. And that's why it's super important to us to invest into it, and currently we are heavily investing into GraphiQL. We'll talk about the past, the present, and the future of GraphiQL, and we'll show what we have been working on. Let's dive into the history briefly. When GraphQL has been announced by this gentleman over here in 2015, at the same time GraphiQL was announced. And Lee actually told me that the GraphiQL that we know today, that also has been released in 2015, is not the first GraphiQL, it's actually version 4 already. There have been a bunch of iterations internally at Facebook, and actually GraphiQL was, by the way, one of the first projects ever to use React.js. In 2017, we built a fork of GraphiQL at a company called GraphQL, where I worked previously, in order to have more IDE features like tabs and being able to share sessions. Then we built a GraphQL VS Code extension, which is now part of the foundation. It's the official GraphQL VS Code extension back at GraphQL. And as GraphQL moved away from GraphQL, I know the names can be confusing, this has been handed over to the foundation. And today, both the GraphQL Playground, but also GraphiQL, they're in the official GraphQL Foundation repository. And so a lot has happened in the meantime. A lot of foundational building blocks have been put in place. And now we're in year 2022, and we want to take GraphiQL to the next level. And not only to a version 2, but also to a version 3. So we want to have 2 major version bumps, and I will explain in a second why that is. But before we dive into that, let's first understand, why do people use GraphiQL? What are actually the user needs? When we took the lead on the project a few months ago, we had a look at all the issues, but also had a bunch of conversations with community members. And so what we found is that there are quite different needs depending on when you want to use the project. On day 1, I just want to try out GraphQL. I want to find out, what is this thing? How does a query actually relate to a response, and play around with it, build up my mental model. And this already needs to be accessible for everyone, including people using a screen reader. Once I'm actually in the middle of building my API, I again have new needs. I want to have fast local development flows, maybe even some keyboard shortcuts. And I want to probably be able to reload my schema, because I'm iterating on my schema. Once I'm building this API out and I have a team, now again I have new needs. I might have a really big schema. At Facebook, they have thousands of types in the schema. I want to maybe be able to customize it. And customization, by the way, is one of the most requested features in the GraphiQL repo. We have over 20 plugins that have been requested. And I probably want to enable it and embed it in my documentation, in my blog, to be able to show people my API. And then last but not least, it's not a primary goal of GraphiQL, but being able to collaborate with my team, maybe sharing some queries. So that's the problem space. And now, how can solution space look like? And for that, we actually have a few guiding principles that I want to share with you. The first one is user focus. When I come into the tool should only show me the absolute minimum stuff that I need to get the job done. What is the job that I want to get done? I want to explore an API, and I want to probably send some queries. Aesthetics. It's also important to us. We believe that good user experience is not just having good keyboard shortcuts and fast workflows. It actually should be delightful to look at. Discoverability. GraphQL, as we know, is a graph. You have fields related to each other, types related to each other. And that is something we need to explore. We need to find out what are the relations to be able to build up our mental model. And so tools like auto-completion, go-to definition, and a docs and explorer is important here. And last but not least, Again, even if I have a really big schema, I need to be able to quickly work with this tool. It still needs to be responsive. And I actually heard from the Meta team that the current schema takes a lot, like multiple minutes to load, and that is something we want to improve. So with all of that in mind, how could the solution now look like? A few years ago, a startup called OneGraph created a extension to GraphQL called GraphQL Explorer. And the idea is I can basically, in a visual manner, create a query. Why is this interesting for us? It helps us with discoverability. And more people in the community have been embedding this in their GraphQL instances. And we have observed that at the same time looks quite similar to the docs. The docs are a tree structure, while this is also a tree structure. So we were thinking, what about combining the two? They take a lot of space on the screen, and how about we put them into one? And that is what we're going for with the new Docs Explorer. The idea is that the need of having documentation, but also being able to construct queries, is merged into one. I also want to say this is an experiment. We will see how good this actually works out in reality. Now you might ask, okay, in the old docs, I could click on a specific type and see details. How does this work here? So if you want to see type details, you can click on, for example, the starship type or the person type, and now you see again the details. So we are again solving the documentation, but also the discoverability here. And this is actually how the new GraphQL looks like. Everything put together, this is the new design. Now, you might think, okay, we talked about user focus, and there's a lot of stuff on the screen. And how does this work when I want to embed it somewhere? And that's why we have a minimal version as well, that you can embed, for example, in a blog post. You don't need the sidebar. You don't need all the icons. This is the absolute minimum version to just have a query and a response. And then on the other hand, we talked about customizability. That was one of the most requested features after all. So how does that look like? I will show you a schematic view now of our design and how we think about plugins and customizability, both for behavior but also UI plugins. We start on the left side with a similar setup actually to VS Code, where you have the icons that show you like different parts of the sidebar that are activated here, and I can basically change what is happening in the sidebar based on those icons. In VS Code, that's the same behavior. You don't change the whole editor setup, but just the sidebar. And with that, the two plugins that are shipping out of the box are the documentation and the history. Moving on to the editor. We, for example, have a plugin for making the code nice, the prettier plugin. And all these plugins can now be added here. You can basically add a lot of icons and whatever your creativity brings. Another feature that has been widely requested is something like an AST Explorer. So where the query part is basically the same, but now I want to have a different result. I want to have something different in the result view, and for that we are also allowing a switch here, so you can have your own customizations. We all know that we have the variables and the header input usually here. That is also something you can customize. Again, your creativity can go wild. And last but not least, we have seen a lot in GraphQL IDEs that we have been customizing how the response looks like, maybe some headers or some performance information. And here's actually a concrete design how that could look like. So with this, we have the basics for the new GraphQL 2 design. However, there's one more thing, and Thomas will tell you what that is.
Yes, thank you, Tim. There's one more thing. Can you guess what it is? Yes, it's actually also one of the probably most requested things about GraphQL. We are finally shipping GraphQL 2 with a dark theme. And not just plain inverting colors, but we really also made sure that this looks good, it feels good, and is actually hopefully usable in terms of color contrast and stuff. So, Tim now went through the vision that we have for GraphQL. What I want to get a bit into now is tell you a bit, okay, how do we want to make this happen, and what are we doing at the moment? For those of you who maybe followed along with GraphQL for some time, you might notice it's not the first effort around pushing GraphiQL forward. Actually, a couple of years ago already, the maintainers made big plans for a version 2, and it actually contained a lot of the things that we were talking about here today. So plugins, like a more modern React code, even stuff like internationalization. So it was really a lot to it. Sadly, it never saw the light of day, never got published, because it took quite some time to implement, given the huge scope, and at some point it blocked further improvements for the existing version 1, so you couldn't publish any bug fixes anymore. And at some point, the efforts that have been done were moved into a different folder, and the original version 1 code was restored. And after that, pandemic didn't help with that. Like a couple of years, there wasn't really anything moving forward anymore with GraphiQL. So, what do we want to do differently? We basically settled on a step-by-step approach. Instead of going for this big bang release with like tons of new features, everything at once, which takes months of effort, we are trying to work in small iterations and deliver small increments. So basically moving step by step towards the vision that Tim just presented. This also means that we're gonna probably publish a lot more version updates and a lot more quickly, and hopefully won't have to wait for months until we can ship something. I also want to quickly highlight the vision in terms of the architecture that we have for GraphiQL and the repository structure. At the bottom, there's the LSP, the language server protocol, which basically is about communicating between the IDE and GraphQL, which is also used for example for the VS Code extension. And we also have already an implementation for Monaco, basically the VS Code editor. And this is one of the building blocks that makes up GraphiQL. The other two that I want to highlight is a toolkit package, which contains basically utilities that are commonly used and necessary to build a GraphQL IDE. And the other one is a GraphiQL React package, which will basically contain all the building blocks that you need to create a GraphQL IDE. This means context providers, hooks to manage state, but also the actual UI components. And GraphiQL itself will be like a reference implementation of how you can use these building blocks to build a GraphQL IDE. Sorry for that. Nope. No. Sorry. Here we go. All right. What are the concrete next steps? What are we actually doing? The first step was modernizing the code base. And I say was because it's actually at this point probably more or less done. We also published this already. This was published with version 1.9 of GraphiQL. It actually contains no breaking changes yet, so for everybody who's using GraphiQL in their project as a dependency, you should be good to upgrade and hopefully don't have to change anything in your implementation. Step 2 will be the actual UI refresh, like implementing this awesome new design that Tim just showed. And this is work in progress. What work in progress means, I'm going to show you in a bit. And there's one thing that we intentionally left out, and this is the Doc Explorer, because it's the most complex component in the new UI. And again, thinking about step-by-step approach, so intentionally reducing the scope to be able to deliver more quickly. This will basically then be published as version 2. So this is the next major version of GraphiQL, and it will also come with some breaking changes. After that, we're going to keep pushing forward with the next steps for the rest of the year, which will be on the one side, of course, the new Doc Explorer, and also then introducing the Monaco code editor, which will be, as Tim mentioned in the beginning, another major version bump. All right. I've just talked about work in progress, so I think it's about time I show you what that actually means. And let me switch over to the next tab. Here you can actually, lo and behold, see the working version of the new graphical design that Tim just showed. And it's like working, as you know, can resize stuff here. I can type my query, run the query, get a response, the Wi-Fi allows it. So yeah, this is all actually working. I also want to now go through and highlight some stuff that we already improved to show you, hopefully, why this is an improvement at all. First thing I want to show are the hints. Like if I start typing, I get a list of fields that match the thing that I just started typing. If I cycle through these now, I can also see even more details than before about the field, its type, and even its description. And even if the description is very, very long, we made sure that it still looks good and you can explore your schema while typing. Also, things like go to definition. So if I click on the type here, takes me, as before, right to the Doc Explorer. Same if I click on a field here, it automatically opens up in the Doc Explorer. Yeah, maybe mentioning, since we're talking about the Doc Explorer, you can see the positioning changed from the right side to the left side, like Tim showed, where all the plugins will live. Apart from that, not really a lot has changed. The UX is still the same. It just has a fresh coat of paint on it. What I also want to quickly highlight are tabs. As you can see, you don't really see tabs. Because, again, coming back to our design principles that we mentioned before, we want to make it as simple as possible. If you get into the experience, if you open up GraphiQL, maybe you just want to explore the schema, want to type a query, run a query, debug something. Maybe you don't need tabs if you open up GraphiQL. So you don't see them. But once you need tabs and you want to go into more like a power user mode and have multiple operations at the same time and stuff like that, there's a subtle plus icon here next to the logo. And once I click it, I get tabs above my editors. And of course, still works as expected. So if I switch between tabs, all the state of the editors and the response is persisted. Well, and there's one more thing. Remember? The dark theme. Since we implemented all these new styles on top of CSS variables, it was, in the end, really, really easy to basically get a dark mode for it. It took us maybe an hour or two, just switching out the variables, tweaking a bit the styles so that it really looks good. And here we go. Woo! And of course, it still works in dark mode, so it's not just a screenshot that I'm showing you here. All right. You know, sometimes open source is also magical. I mentioned the previous years, not really a lot has moved forward. And when Tim started pushing for this topic and we got into it, we really saw a lot of excitement around these new developments. I just want to quickly show you the discussion on GitHub where Tim posted the new design and give you a quick scroll through here. So yeah, it's been a lot of great feedback, a lot of discussions, a lot of excitement. And even more, some people got so excited that they already started hacking on the new design and especially the new Doc Explorer. So in fact, we have at the moment 2 proof of concept versions already for the new Doc Explorer. I want to quickly also show you one of them from Jonathan, who just came into our working group meeting unannounced and dropped this in front of Tim and me, and we were like, this is awesome. It's actually, it is fully functional. So I can click here, my query is constructed, and can even run it. Yes, I can. So this is super awesome, and we hope that we also can take a lot of these efforts that these great people have done over eventually in the GraphiQL code base. So coming back to my slides. So, showed you now a bunch of stuff, great demos, hopefully got you excited. So I also want to tell you how can you take action. So if this excites you, if you want to be a part of it, if you just want to try it out, what can you do? You should definitely join our Discord server, the GraphQL Discord server, the official one. We have some channels in there specifically for GraphiQL. There is also like basically every open source project in the GraphiQL ecosystem is part of this Discord channel server. We in fact have two channels, one GraphiQL channel, which is more about general chatting about GraphiQL questions or whatever. And we have a GraphiQL development channel, which is specifically for the efforts that we're like talking about today. So keep an eye out for that. We'll post updates in there, hopefully more frequently in the future also. The QR code is a link for an invite to the GraphiQL Discord server if you're not already part of it. You can also, like the preview I just showed you, that wasn't my local machine, that was an Netlify deployment, so this is public. You can try this out, you can play around with it, see how it feels, and we would love if you give us feedback and maybe also report if something isn't quite working yet or doesn't look like it should. We'll post a link in the Discord channel. And in fact, we also published like a first canary version of the GraphiQL package with all these changes, like the new design that we just demoed, that you can, if you have a project that's using GraphiQL, it would be super awesome if you would give this a try, install it, and see if this works out for you, or maybe more importantly, what doesn't yet work out for you, so that we can see how to make the next major version upgrade as easy as possible. We'll also write up some migration guides, as I mentioned. There are going to be breaking changes. Also have an eye out for the Discord server around that. Yeah, I think to close us up, Tim and me, and like we at Stellate, we believe that GraphiQL is a crucial part of the whole GraphiQL ecosystem. Because no matter if you're building an API or if you're like consuming it, the tool that you're gonna be interacting with on a probably more or less daily basis is a GraphQL IDE or GraphiQL. And coming also back to the question with that Tim opened the talk, we believe that at some point in the future, everybody who's starting to build an API has to use GraphQL just for the fact that the tooling is so damn good. Thank you very much. You can also follow us on Twitter if you like. Check out Stellate. We just rebranded, so if you know GraphCDN, that's now Stellate. And if you want some awesome GraphiQL t-shirts, we have a booth. Come by and let's have a chat about GraphiQL. We can also have some questions now if there are any. All right.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks.